We want to thank our lead sponsor Starboard for supporting this season of the SUP FM podcast. Whether you're a seasoned racer, an adventurous explorer or a beginner, Starboard has the perfect board for you. Their race boards help riders secure 29 medals at the 2023 ICF Worlds, while their touring boards offer a blend of glide and stability, ideal for long expeditions. For those looking for top-notch paddles, the Lima pre-preg models used by world champions are a game changer, and if you're just starting out, the inflatable IGO models are stable and durable, featuring welded rails to ensure longevity. Choose Starboard for unparalleled quality and performance across all levels of paddleboarding, and the link to the Starboard website is in the show notes. Welcome to another episode of the SUP FM podcast. On this show, we chat with people from the SUP tribe or to people who can help us improve our knowledge and increase our love of both the sport and the water. Every episode is intended to inspire you or to help you to get more deeply immersed in the sport, whatever your current experience level, through my conversations with guests who include leading athletes, scientists, explorers, TED speakers and New York Times best-selling authors. If you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're doom scrolling, then why not also take the opportunity to make sure that you're following us on Facebook, Instagram, and our new YouTube channel where you can watch our chat and get some bonus content. This episode is a very special one as we celebrate one of the greatest personalities in stand-up paddleboarding, none other than Casper Steinfath, the Danish Viking himself. As many of you know, 2024 marks a moment in the world of SUP as Casper will officially retire at the Copenhagen ISA World Championships. And though the event will take place in the capital of Denmark, his heart and roots are firmly planted in Klitmøller, known as Cold Hawaii, where his journey began. Back in 2022, I had the privilege of sitting down with Casper for an in-depth conversation about his incredible journey from growing up in the rugged surf of Klitmøller to dominating the SUP racing scene, and of course his legendary open water crossings and his other adventures. What's even more remarkable is that despite his huge success as a six-time world champion, Casper has always remained approachable, humble and generous with his time. He's the kind of guy who makes everyone around him feel welcome, whether you're a seasoned paddler or you're just getting started. And beyond his personal accomplishments, Casper has left Danish paddling in an incredibly healthy place. As he steps away from the competitive scene, a new generation of young paddlers are already making their mark, inspired by his leadership and his passion for the sport. In today's episode, we'll be revisiting that 2022 interview to reflect on his amazing career and the lasting impact he's had on the sport. So whether you're a fan of racing, adventure paddling, or just great stories, you're in for a treat. This was such a long chat and there was so much to talk about, I originally split it down into 2 episodes. So for the first time, you can hear the full thing back as it was originally recorded and dive back into my conversation with Casper Steinfath from 2022 as we celebrate his legacy and his contribution, not just to Danish paddling, but to paddling across the world. Hey Casper, welcome to SUP FM.
Thanks, Simon. Stoked to be here.
Well, it's always a great pleasure for me to speak to a 6 times world champion and a 2 times winner of Red Bull Heavy Water. But there's so much more to your SUP career than just even those stellar achievements. And I really appreciate you joining us, particularly because you've had a busy few months. And as we speak, you've not long finished at Red Bull's Midsummer Vikings in Copenhagen, which by all accounts was a pretty awesome event again this year. And before that, you completed the Great Danish Paddle, where you experienced all of the weather and conditions and challenges that Denmark could throw at you as you completed the 1,448 kilometre distance around and across Denmark. And congratulations on both of those achievements. I guess you haven't had any problems sleeping recently.
Thanks, Simon. I mean, when I look back at the last, 2-3 months, it's kind of a blur. Like so much has happened. Right now I'm sitting here. It's Monday morning. I had a bachelor party because I'm getting married. So I still feel the effects of the bachelor party on my mind. But it's been a blur from paddling around the Kingdom of Denmark, seeing other sides of the country that I've never seen, to suddenly hosting the Red Bull Midsummer Vikings, a team stand-up paddle event where we had over 400 paddlers on 82 teams. Sometimes I have to pinch myself because I can't really believe all this is happening, because there's a lot of good stuff happening. But I think the last few nights I've just been sleeping like a baby, knowing that, okay, now I can relax for a little bit. There's nothing major happening right now.
Well, you say that, you've still got a busy summer ahead, and the highlight of the summer, as I guess people will already have guessed, comes in August, and that's not the APP in London, that's your wedding. How's the preparation going on that?
Well, the preparations are going. I'm getting married August 13th, and I think I'm really lucky to have my fiancée Stina. She's kind of got most of it under control for now, because I've been a little bit distant with all my projects and sporting goals. So I think my job now is to lock down the menu, what we're going to eat. And we have this really cool venue in Denmark. It's this old Viking tent we're getting married in. So I have to prepare the feast. That's my job, I guess.
Excellent. Traditional male role there, getting on with the meat and food and so on. And obviously
Exactly.
you've got your bachelor party out the way already, which is the other key responsibility that we have. It's tough, isn't it? And a bloke preparing for a wedding. I know that. So we'll talk a bit more about racing and midsummer and the Great Danish Paddle a little later on. But just tell us a little bit more about your background, because you come from a family who've got a strong adventurous streak and a real love of the water. So just tell us about your early relationship with water and growing up in cold Hawaii.
Yeah, I mean, today I'm 28 years old. And, I grew up in the cold waters of Scandinavia, in Denmark. And the reason I don't have the classic Scandinavian accent is probably that my dad is from California, and despite living in Denmark for 28 years now, still has not learned to speak Danish. So I was influenced by my dad and his passion for surfing. And, I just grew up by the water with my dad and my brother and my mom. And, just playing in the ocean was very natural for me. And it was really all about playing. And the short board became a long board. And eventually, when I was a teenager, I think I was like 13 or 14, I picked up a stand-up paddleboard for the first time. And, that kind of just triggered this life on the water. I realized that there was something cool about standing on a board, whether it was a vessel for adventure or a vessel for competition. My life has kind of revolved around the water in one way or another. And, I've been very fortunate to live a life so far, making a livelihood as well from stand-up paddling. And, that's been one hell of an adventure so far.
Well, absolutely. And I checked out one of the documentaries on you standing on the water, and that gives us a bit of a taste of what it was like for you growing up in Klitmøller with your family and friends. And it starts with a Danish TV news report of a really wild weather day. And obviously you're on the northwest coast of Denmark. It's got to be pretty extreme before it features in the news. And amongst all of the shots of members of the public trying to stand upright in this really severe wind, there's footage of three lads, teenagers, which turns out to be a young Casper and your brother and a friend of yours, heading out into what looks like sort of fairly gnarly waves there. And my Danish is a little bit rusty, but there's also sort of various comments that people have made, on that news report. And I guess that they're not totally supportive to what you guys were doing there.
Absolutely not. I mean, I guess if you pause the movie and read all those Facebook comments that were on the tabloid newspapers and stuff, basically we were being called young, stupid, suicidal. I think the worst part was for my parents. Like, they were being called the worst parents in Denmark. But the backstory is that it was this storm like we get in the fall. These storms that just come roaring across, and And, you know, as surfers, like, it's not that we have a death wish, but we really, you know, in a sense, that's when Mother Nature invites you to come dance when the conditions are right. And I think like Friedrich Nietzsche kind of sums it up the best, in my opinion. Like, if you see someone doing something stupid, maybe it's because you can't hear the music they're dancing to, and it doesn't make sense. But I think growing up in Denmark, one has to understand that we have a very strong water culture here, but we also have a very strong fishing culture where, you know, people would go out and, you know, it was a livelihood to live from the ocean. And like, just like the same in the UK, like, you know, people lost their lives as well. So I grew up in a time when there was a paradigm shift where previously going on the water in Scandinavia had meant like it was serious business. It was a workplace. And now these teenagers and like all of us surfers and paddlers came in saying, no, it can also be a playground if you treat it with the right respect and you know how the elements are moving. So yeah, that scene from Standing on Water was kind of summarized the shift of paradigm in Scandinavia.
And there was some familiarity I had there because it looks like growing up in Klitmøller, there weren't huge amounts of cinemas to hang about in. So you got your entertainment where you could. You know, I grew up during a period where I kind of went a bit feral with my brothers and friends, and we went off and did stupid things in nature and, you know, ended up occasionally in the A&E department of the local hospital. But it teaches you things about your limits. And I think parents, you know, quite rightly in some situations, they wrap their kids up in cotton wool, but there's definitely something to be said for growing up in that sort of environment and making your own entertainment.
There definitely is. And I think my dad was the one that summed it up in the movie again. He calls it deep play. And, you know, it's, you know, being immersed in, call it a game or call it a play where, you know, you're dealing with some variables, which is the wind and the waves and, you know, all these things you can't control. But, you know, learning to play with all these things that are potentially dangerous also makes you very aware and very, it's like he said, you don't just go to the roller coaster and expect to be, you know, amused. You have to be engaged in the process. And like, I still kind of laugh because there's, you know, my mom and dad had so much footage of my brother and I just playing around in the waves, like washing into rocks and, you know, trying to just feel our limits. But
yeah,
I think that deep play, there's something about it. And I think all of us that go paddling or surfing, you know, even if we're not kids, we are still playing with some very, very strong powers of nature. And that makes us feel alive and makes us also, you know, respect boundaries. But we only know where the boundaries are if we find them.
Yeah, it's all about sort of finding those limits, pushing slightly above and beyond them. So do you think that deep immersion into that environment gave you a bit of an advantage when it came to your racing career in terms of reading water? Because that's a formative time, those teenage years, and you were just seemingly in the water testing your limits at all moments. And you'll talk about Red Bull later on. That's probably one of the more extreme sort of races you've been involved in. But your successes have come out of having that deep understanding of the water and kind of how it works.
Yeah, you know, I would say that, you know, growing up here, you know, temperatures are cold a lot of times. Like this is not Hawaii. It's chilly and it's not always pleasant to be in the water. But because of that immersion and that deep play, you know, I got to spend many hours out there in very torrential conditions. And I think it's part of the key to where I am now. It's definitely a part of the key to where I stand right now, having made a career off racing. Because I think when I started traveling the world to races, I always had this power with me of, you know, when you're freezing on the start line or the ocean is just really choppy and chaotic and you're thinking, that's not really ideal. I think the mindset I brought with me from a background in Denmark definitely helped. You know, I did not expect palm trees and turquoise water. That was just a bonus when that happened.
Absolutely. It's all of those challenging situations that sort of forge you. And it's been one of the consistent things speaking to all the the top level athletes. And I spoke to Bart de Zwart last week as well. We had a similar conversation about the fact that you've got to be comfortable with discomfort. And the more discomfort you put yourself in, the more you know that you can deal with any situation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, Bart's a huge inspiration for me. Bart was one of the early guys in the stand-up paddle world that I could kind of, look towards as a mentor. And I think just like, discomfort is such an interesting topic because we live in a world where we are so comfortable. The contrast is, we have warm houses in the Western world. We have couches, we have Netflix. And I think it's weird to say because I just feel I grew up in being comfortable, okay, it's not comfortable when you're surfing in the middle of winter and you come walking back to shore with numb fingers and brain is just freezing. But there's something that makes you feel alive when you test those contrasts of comfort and discomfort, where it's like, I think Bart was the one that said the food tastes way better when you've had an epic adventure. And like, that's only something I can say I'm maybe becoming more aware of as I'm getting older now, where like, wow, this is actually, I really get a kick out of like doing this circumnavigation of Denmark because I hit some sides of myself that, I didn't really know existed. So I mean, I don't stop me because I feel I could go off on this ramble about discomfort, but it's really a fascinating topic.
Well, we're all about rambles on here, and we sort of follow them off in all sorts of directions, and it's an area that I'm interested in. I'm also interested in what you said earlier on about having to get actively involved, yourself on the water, and this is a kind of problem that I've sort of identified in the UK because obviously we've got loads of people worldwide who have joined the sport. And for a lot of them, they just use them as beach toys, and that's fine as long as they don't have an offshore wind. But there's this business about actually taking accountability for your own safety out there and being aware of what's going on. And it's a really difficult message to put across because people are in the cozy environment. You've got a car with an airbag and so on, and you've got all of those protections. But what they don't realize is that you're going into an environment where on a bike, if you get a puncture, you can step off your bike and get a taxi. No such opportunities if you're 2 miles offshore and there's something wrong, your paddleboard's deflating or something. It's a really difficult message to get across. I just wonder whether you'd observe that sort of thing in Denmark as well.
Oh, it's 100%. It's the same here. It's the ultimate paradox in one way because there's no doubt that stand-up paddling has been on an upward trajectory like since Laird started messing around in Hollywood back in 2007 or when it was, and like stand-up paddling is the paradox because it is so accessible in a sense. Like anyone can literally on the right board go out, stand up, and have a magical experience of trying something new. But at the same time, because it is so accessible, it also creates that, it gets people out there that are not paying attention. And this is really difficult to talk about because one can easily get very polarized on one end of the discussion or the other. Because if you look at, from my perspective, like I came into the world of stand-up paddling from a surfing background. And with surfing, you're like playing in rough conditions a lot of time. And when I was a kid, like my dad made a very strong point out of me understanding, you can get in the water almost wherever you want. But the real key is to understand how do you get back from the water in a situation where the wind has picked up or your leash has snapped and you have to swim in. We were like mentored to be aware of all the conditions around us. And now it's just funny, like with, you can buy inflatable stand-up paddle boards at literally the supermarket down the street, which means also because they're priced as they are, people are giving it a shot. And it's the same picture here as everywhere in the world. Some people get out there and unfortunately end in bad situations where, it's I don't really know what the solution to the problem is, but all I can say is that we're in Denmark, we're trying, and when I say we, it's, myself, it's other stand-up paddlers, it's the federation we have. We're trying to educate. We're trying to, make people aware of how the mechanisms of water work. And it's tragic when it goes wrong, but I keep believing that the leading star is that stand-up paddling and water is a huge benefit. Like, how do you say, like, it's a huge it can add quality. It can add quality to people's lives. That's the bottom line. And just hopefully we can figure out to tell people how to play correctly or play while being aware. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is it's a paradox because it's so accessible. Anyone can do it.
And it's the human factor, isn't it, in there? Because, people, when you're solving a problem like that, you can go to equipment. So how can we make the equipment as safe as we can? Have you got the right kit? I mean, there's a knowledge element in that. There's knowledge about how things work, tides and, coastal patterns and so on. But there's the human factor as well. And people don't necessarily spot the risk. There are people who feel fear when there's no risk, and there are people where there's risk out there and they just don't feel the fear because they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, and fear is not a bad thing. Like, you got to remember, fear is probably fear and angst as is what's kept us alive as a human race. Because if everyone just had no brains and jumped into the river, like, we'd all be swept away and drowned somewhere. But I think it's like the fear is a good thing because it makes us aware. We ultimately we don't want to die, but that should be the premise right there, that we should all be a little bit afraid and then, either educate ourselves or make good decisions based on the fear. If you don't have fear and you just blatantly go out, like say on a day where it's either outgoing tide or, I don't know, 30 knots offshore wind, then you're missing something up here. But I also have a hard time in this discussion with, now it's like, if you say it's a safety issue, like, because it's like, for example, here in Denmark, stand-up paddling is booming, and, when regulatory, how do you say, functions bodies come into place. Yeah. Like, when suddenly, because it's so popular, we get these, like, for example, mandates that say everyone has to wear a life vest. And I'm not advocating against life vests here, but say when suddenly, because so many people are paddling on the ocean now, the regulatory bodies say everyone should wear a life vest. Well, I understand the premise of that, but if you're a surfer and you're playing in the waves, there is a time and there's a time not to have a life vest. Like, if you're trying to go under, and it's just, I can't control what regulatory bodies do. I can't control what other people do, but I can encourage, as you said it, Simon, the human factor, the individual human to pay attention, and, we can all try to help each other as much as we can, because I think it's you and me and everyone that has a board under their arm when they stand on the beach or the dock or at the lake. That's when you make the decision if you go or don't go.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was Jerry Lopez or who said it, like, if in doubt, maybe don't go out, or at least dive into understanding the energy at work there.
And just bringing things back to you here, Casper, and that's a really useful and really interesting diversion there, because it's been obsessing me and a lot of people over here for a while. But you had a bit of a fear of water, incredibly, to start with, didn't you? Didn't you have a fear of putting your head underwater? That was astounding to hear that.
I had like, it was in my early years, so it's very vague, the memories of it, but I have this visual picture in my head of, of course, my dad, being a surfer from California, thought like I should surf. And I think he brought me out on his tandem surfboard, like before I could even walk, or at least when I was a toddler. And he, eventually I probably fell in the water, and I just have this vivid imagery in my mind of like looking up and seeing the sun on the surface of the water and just feeling out of control. And that, I don't know if that was just a dream or something that happened, but in my like childhood years, I just had this phobia of getting my head underwater. I could not stomach the thought of being stuck underwater and not getting up again. And that was not exactly practical when my dad wanted to take me surfing, and when I had a little brother that was, did not mind getting his face wet. So I remember just, there was not fond memories when I was a kid. But that fear stuck with me. And, eventually, like, I don't want to admit, like, how do I say it? Like, it would be very convenient in a sense to say that, oh, I was not scared of water. That was just, some childish thing. But I think it was real. And I think what happened was there was some type of catalyst that, there was a pull effect. Maybe it was my friends that started wanting to surf. And then that really pulled me to face a fear. And like, I have a hard time explaining it. It really is hard to explain, but it's the same situation as like facing the start line of Red Bull Heavy Water. You're calculating the fear, you're calculating risks, you're methodical. And I think it just, the phobia disappeared for me because I started really paying attention. It's like, oh, that's what over there, that's where the waves are breaking. That means the current's going to push along the beach this way. And that means I can get back to the beach here. So it's, as a kid, it was totally scary. But as I got a little bit older, maybe some of the, the dark, scary things suddenly came into the light, and I looked at them from a different perspective. And I think we all, it's like, isn't there in Walt Disney's Winnie the Pooh, there's one of the films where, there's the big, dark, dangerous forest. But in the other light, it's the magical forest, and it's not that big and scary, but
it's all about perspective, isn't it? And again, it sounds like you developed a degree of control, and once you develop that control and understanding, potentially that erodes that fear and just gets you on that different path.
Yeah, definitely. Once I felt in control, it changed, because I think it was, you're right. When I felt out of control, I couldn't do anything. Then I was paralyzed. And then it's like back to those, fight, flight, or freeze, like reaction patterns. So, but I'm definitely thankful that I overcame that fear, and whoever helped me do it, because I probably didn't do it alone either. Like I'm sure my dad and my brother and my friends were the ones that helped me, see the light.
So just coming back to your water education, a lot of the current top SUP athletes, particularly those from the other Hawaii, not the cold Hawaii, they grew up doing a load of different water sports depending on the season and the conditions. You talk quite a lot about surfing. Did you get exposed to any of those other sports growing up, or was it pretty much surfing for you?
It was predominantly surfing, but I mean, here in Klitmuller in cold Hawaii, it is a windsurfing hotspot. So I was exposed to windsurfing. I was exposed to a lot of different, like, swimming and football and all kinds of other sports that a kid does. But it was really like, it was a little surf culture here, but, it was a young surf culture. Like, we didn't have the legends of, say, like Robbie Nash or, Laird Hamilton or those guys around. So, but it was predominantly surfing that captured my imagination, and then stand-up paddling came in my teenage years.
Yeah, because one strength of having that wide water sports exposure is that it develops a range of skills. But I suppose at its core, surfing, as you've mentioned, allows you to read the water, and you go out in uncomfortable positions. You're always wet, basically. Do you think real deep exposure to surfing was an advantage for you, or has been an advantage for you on the racing circuit?
I think it was a huge advantage, and I still believe that a lot of athletes that come into stand-up paddling with a surfing background possess some natural skill sets. Like for me, like you got to look at like stand-up paddle racing. It's not this linear thing. It's still developing. And like if you look at equipment and technique and like different types of athletes that are performing well, it's still changing. But in those early years, like I started racing in around 2009. A lot of the races we had back then were ocean races. And, of course, if you have a surfing background and you're paddling through waves, it's a no-brainer that you're gonna, like, I could feel when I was paddling either through or with the surf, it was like I did not have to allocate as much of my focus on the waves, because that was like, how to say, like it was subconsciously just something that was there. And like, I could see other guys were just like so fixated on, the wave, and, they were losing all their focus on paddling. So in that way, it was a huge benefit. But what I also experienced is that, like, even if you go to a flat water race, like say on a lake, we had a classic race down in Germany some years called the Lost Mills. And even there, like when you're paddling in flat water, when you have so many boards pushing around and, just creating wakes and side bump and the chaos, definitely anytime you're dealing with chaos and many moving objects, a lot of the skill set from surfing comes in. And yeah, I could definitely feel a benefit from that.
And you strive in that environment, in that racing environment, because obviously your specialty is on the sort of shorter course, technical surf, sprint disciplines. So I've heard you talk before about how you fell into stand-up paddling. It was your uncle's influence, I understand. Was it a Hawaiian shirt and a cigar was involved as well?
Yeah, you got the story right there. It's I was on a surf trip with my family and my uncle from California. We were in Portugal on the island of Madeira, and this is like 2007 or 8. And, I had never seen a stand-up paddleboard before. And I just remember the waves were small one day, and my uncle Tim, he is out messing around, and suddenly I see him come paddling around the corner, and he's standing on this board with like his shorts on and, a Hawaiian shirt, sunglasses, like a hat, and he has a freaking cigar in his mouth as well. And he just looks like, I remember I had the feeling he looks like the biggest idiot in the whole world right now. And, he was just a goofball. He loved playing around, and we laughed, and he caught some waves and made it look fun. And then we tried it, and, I ate my own words, because there was just something very special about standing on the water in that sense. And it started as a bad joke, but I think at that, like, just shortly, like at that point in my shortboarding career, I was kind of hitting a wall where I was reaching a point where everyone was so serious and competitive, like it was just this very limited tunnel vision people had at least in that environment I was getting into. And then my uncle Tim just kind of comes in from the side with that clown act or whatever it was, and, showed that like having fun on the water is key.
And it's that adaptability, isn't it, of the sport? So it sounds like that's something that you've always been stimulated by, new opportunities, testing yourself against different things and just giving you that sort of diversity and the ability to just explore, because that's a joy in itself, isn't it?
It is. And, it's kind of like, when you're at the family party, family birthday or whatever, and you're posing for a group photo, and, everyone's standing there and like no one has an emotional expression on their face. Everyone's kind of just stone faced.
Yeah.
I can't handle those situations. Then that's when I like, oh, let's do something funny. Or, I really enjoy, maybe I'm not the best person at, I don't even know what the English term is, but like, I'm not so good at repetitively running something.
Yeah.
I like breaking in new boundaries and territory. Building stuff, thinking of new ways to do stuff. So that's where stand-up paddling really appealed to me, because it was this whole new world, and who knew where it was going to go. So I enjoyed like being able to latch on and like steer it a little bit in what I thought could be a fun direction.
Well, it certainly was, and that was, what did you say, 2007, 2008, something like that?
In one of those winters, yeah.
And you were racing not long after that. And I know that your first race was a race down in Hamburg, and I think your dad's probably protected now, but he had to lie to get you in there, or you lied about your age because you're underage, but you got in.
I was underage, and it was my first race. I remember we drove down like 5 hours down to Hamburg where it happened, and it was just, I was curious, what is this thing? And like, as a young male, I was also curious to see where do I rank compared to everyone else. And we got there, and I was too young to enter, so I just kind of looked at my dad and said, "Hey, I'm 16, right?" And he just nodded. Yeah, today you're 16. And I ended up, it was this World Cup where it was all the top names in the sport those early years, like Bart Deswart, Ikulu Kalama, Eric Terrien, Ernest Johnson. There's all these characters. And I was just like amazed looking at them. Paul Jackson was there as well. And I just got such a kick out of it. And, I ended up kind of stealing Robbie Nash's, I ended up legitimately stealing Robbie's board.
Yeah, I was going to say borrowed in my question.
Yeah.
Got hold of it somehow.
Somehow got hold of Robbie's board. And ended up winning the amateur race, which was huge. I felt ecstatic, and had all these German people just clapping and yelling, and ended up getting a wild card to compete against the pros. And I remember it was like I was walking on water. It felt like in that final. Ended up finishing 10th place or something, but I think that moment kind of cemented for me that, okay, this stand-up paddling thing, I like the sport, I like the people, and I just realized like this is what I want to do more of. So that's where the whole virus completely just took off.
Absolutely, and you play down coming 10th amongst all those legends, but I'll just draw a veil over that one for a moment. But in terms of Robbie, obviously that was the start of your relationship with Nation. They've been a sponsor of yours all the way through. What contributions Robbie made to your career to date?
Robbie has probably been, apart from my uncle Tim, Robbie has been like the biggest player in my stand-up paddling career. After hijacking his board in Hamburg, he remembered me for that. And, the next year I came back, I was on a contract with Nash. Robbie gave me boards, to use at first, just helped me out. Robbie, what I always admired, I still admire about Robbie is that he's an athlete, and, he was very good at like seeing where I was and seeing what type of mentoring I needed. Whether it was understanding what type of equipment is good for certain conditions. Robbie helped me understand how to ultimately talk to a camera as well. Robbie's is built like his career has been successful also because he was able to portray feelings and, more than just stand on a podium and smile. So Robbie has been probably the defining, factor on my career, where also he treated it more as a lifestyle than say like just pure sporting. And so yeah, I've been writing for Nash since 2009, and I'm still on Nash, and part of developing stand-up paddle equipment and foils and whatnot. So I still have a relation there that I'm really, really proud of. And I think all I can say is that I'm very happy Robbie was there at that point, because I needed someone to look up to. And, growing up again in the small cold water basin of Scandinavia, it's, even though the internet exists, it's very far to Hawaii. And like, especially in those early years of paddling, it was in Hawaii and California that everything was happening. So Robbie was kind of, and through him, Kai Lenny and Connor Baxter, they became my connection to the broader stand-up paddling world.
In terms of your racing career, we've already mentioned you're a specialist at the sort of technical sprint type events, which generally tend to be the sort of spectacular, action heavy, TV ready events. There are lots of variations in lots of different locations, but could you just explain the formats and the variations and what it is about those events that you really love?
Well, I mean, Yeah, there's many great styles of racing, and like the long distances are amazing in their own sense. But I think what captivated my imagination was with the sprints and with let's call it the technical style races, where the sprints can be anything from like 200 meters. The technical races are somewhere generally between, I don't know, 1.5 kilometer and like 4 kilometers. Like if we just put them all under one umbrella, they're relatively short and action packed. That means, there's a lot of buoy turns. There's a lot of running on the beach, either from the start line to the water or from the water to the finish line. It's like kind of a cross of, it's almost like sometimes there's more running than paddling, but, and then you can put the courses in the surf as well. So you have the extra factors of waves, current, wind, and, ultimately it's like this cocktail of ingredients that create so many variables, where what I like about it is that it generally prevents just the strongest athlete from winning. Like you have to be tactical. You have to be smart about, depleting your energy resources at the right time. And I guess my favorite thing is that you should never give up in these style of races, because even if you're like separated from the lead pack, if you're behind them, you might catch a wave that they don't catch, and suddenly everything's open again. So I was drawn to the chaos. And again, I think that's from my upbringing. I enjoy when there's a lot of mess, because I see some people kind of freak out during that and, can't create order. But for me, there's so much opportunity inside chaos. And yeah, that's kind of been my thing.
Well, it's about adaptability and flexibility, isn't it? Really, and
true.
For someone who looks for new opportunities everywhere and novelty and mixing things up, it sounds like the perfect environment rather than sort of structure and predictability. And I'm speaking to you now. You've succeeded in so many events. As I said, multiple world champion. Where are you now in terms of your racing and your competitive aspirations?
That's an honest question, and I'll try to answer honestly, because I'm in a very tricky place right now. I've been racing pretty much nonstop without any major breaks, like except for COVID in 21 or 20. I've won 6 world titles so far and got to travel the world, but I'm kind of sitting in a situation now where like I feel like I've been through this. It's like a pattern that has repeated itself many years. You come in early in the season, you train your ass off, create a base, then competition season comes, you have the races you focus on, and then it's physically and mentally exhausting, to like it's there's nothing new about it. It's performance. But I definitely sense that I'm at a point now where I've raced a lot, and I can sense that I'm probably more drawn to other types of things than just hardcore racing. If I just look back the last few years, like these projects, whether it's the Viking crossings or circumnavigating Denmark, or building the Midsummer Vikings team event, I think racing is just kind of something that's still part of me, but I don't know how to really describe it, Simon. Like I'm definitely like at a crossroads in my life where it's given me a lot so far, but there's also so many other challenges I want to take up, that to be, and this is probably what's like, I still had watching the Santa Monica race on the APP, like following that this weekend, not being there myself was, it's amazing to watch athletes perform at the highest level. I just don't know if, like with so many other things appealing to me, and knowing how much it takes, how much sacrifice you got to put to be at peak physical level to compete, that's a sacrifice. It's not like the early days of paddling where us surfers, had a good enough base and had a lot of skill that we could kind of, half-ass it sometimes. Like So it's an interesting time. Let me put it like that. I'm not sure that I'm done with racing, but it's like I've been part of it for a lot of years now, and who knows? Maybe I continue, maybe I don't. But
well, there are plenty of evergreen athletes out there. If you did decide to step away for a while, I mean, Candice is still ripping it up, and there's plenty of examples. But yeah, there are so many opportunities out there, and we will talk about that for a second. But I just wanted to ask you, as we speak, and as you mentioned, we're speaking at the end of June 22, and yesterday the APP Santa Monica Open has taken place. There was a bit of a controversy, I'll put it that way, in terms of the men's race, which led to an unusual outcome on that. Connor won the sprint. But we've got more competitions. You've raced in London before. Are you intending to race again in London, or is that still sort of under consideration?
I really hope to be back in London. It's on my list to be there. Like, I'm planning on being in London. Hopefully I'll be there as an athlete, but given that I've spent the last 3 months paddling, or 2 months paddling around Denmark, my physical shape right now is not exactly prime for racing. I'm more of like look at me, I'm not a Formula One car right now. I feel more like a 1975 diesel engine. So I'm definitely gonna try to make it to London, but time will have to tell if it's race shape I'm in or not. But I'm heading to the UK for the Trent 100.
Right.
And I like, that's an event that's been on my radar for a lot of years, and maybe I've actually kind of avoided that event some years because I was focused on being in prime racing shape. So that it's a different scenario this year.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is a fantastic race, and from all accounts, a good evening to be had after the various different days of racing there as well.
So I hear.
Yeah, and the plus side, if you don't race the APP in London, I mean, I've spoken to a few athletes about it, and who knew? Apparently, when you're racing the distance race down the Thames, it's not an open bus tour. You're hardly aware of the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben sort of flying past. So you might be able to sort of see a bit of the course if you're observing and commentating or doing whatever you're doing. So just to finish off on the race stuff, I know that you had a few little routines that you had before, which got you into the zone before competition. Just tell us about your sort of superstitions and your sort of patterns.
Well, I have a very, over 10 years of racing, I developed a very strong pre-race routine. And that essentially starts already from, when the race week begins, arriving as early as possible, and getting focused, paying attention to the conditions. But the thing that probably stands out the most is every time I'm on the start line, I try to just take a plunge. I just try to jump in the water, like a minute before the start. And even if it's cold, I like to do that because it just heightens all my senses. Like when I hit the water, like all my mind just gets a shock from the cold water generally. And that means that my hearing sense, my muscles start twitching, and I just feel, ready. I think that's the one that people see, like that's the visual one. And then probably the other like, how do I say it, like pre-race routine that I really stick to is I put on heavy metal music, literally like, the last 30 minutes or so before the race. I try to, zone off. Because when you're at an event, like, just picture it, you're walking around and there's so many people, and it's, people want to talk, and there's cameras, there's music, there's all these distracting factors. So for me, it always worked just trying to just stay in my zone. But it's always funny because every athlete has their own way of coping with situations. And I remember, I don't know if you've talked to Zane Schweitzer on this podcast yet.
Not yet.
But Zane is like he's like the most colorful character, but I always loved Zane at watching him at events, because I was just thinking, like, I can't do that. Like, cause he would always, like, instead of me where I try to, like, kind of just close off, he embraces it. Like, almost the more sociable, The more music, the more dancing, the better Zane generally performed.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all got our own patterns, and just yeah, I did promise that would be the last racing question, but
Go ahead.
Heavy water. I mean, it's an insane, absolutely insane collection of races, and I guess the question that I will be leading to is clearly you've got an in with Red Bull. What are the plans for future competitions? Are you aware of any of that? But just talk us through some of those wins, because I mean, it was full on frightening, and that's as an observer just getting out there, and you've won it twice. Just tell us about those experiences.
I'll try to summarize it, but it's heavy water could be a whole discussion in itself, because it was to sum it up short, it was a psychological drama. Both editions, or all three editions that have taken place. In short, Red Bull Heavy Water, probably the craziest race in the world of stand-up paddling. It took place 3 or 4 times in San Francisco. And what was unique about the event was there was a 3 or 4 week standby period for each event, which means that we would race on the day that had the biggest waves. We would need a minimum of 10 feet before the contest could get the green light. And some of those events probably had slightly bigger than 10 feet waves, pushing 15. Like, I don't know, size is relative, right? But it was big, and trying to paddle race boards through that type of surf is just, there's some physics that are not really made for each other. And basically we would race from the beach in and out through the surf, a few times. And then, once we'd made it through the surf a few times, we would paddle to Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay of San Francisco. So the race was a mixture of, like a 10, 12 kilometer long distance and a heavy technical race. And I think, like, I could really talk forever about this, Simon. So just break me off whenever it gets too much. But
you carry on.
Okay. The way I approached the events was because it was a World Cup, and there was a lot of prize money on the line. You had the best athletes there in the world, so all the ingredients for like a high octane battle were present. And then, factor in the angst and the, not fear, but more angst of the swell that was arriving. It just made for some days leading into the events that were horrible. They were freaking terrible. Like, you're just imagining these death waves, and you're having a hard time sleeping, and especially the night before the races, it's too much. At least I had a hard time dealing with it. But then, I had, on the 2 occasions that I won the race in 2017 and 19, I think my approach became more that one of survival rather than racing, because I felt it was wrong to think about it as a race, because if you go into race mode, generally you'll start to make decisions that are more based on speed, and speed can sometimes be just it blinds you. So when I approached it, I always looked at, reading the conditions, and like San Francisco and Ocean Beach. Ocean Beach is the name of the venue where the waves are. It's characterized by having these like 3 sections. There's like 3 points where the wave breaks. There's the inside section, which is like the shore break, right where you enter the water. That was just like a constant washing machine. And, to get through that, you have to just be consistent and push hard. The second zone, and this is just my personal description of it, like, people will have other opinions, but the second zone is kind of like the rough one. That's where the waves are, they've already broken, but there's just mountains of white water rolling towards you. Like, just picture that you're as far out as you can see. There's almost just white water coming at you that's 6 or 8 feet tall. And you can generally get your board over those sections if you're like skilled, but you're not going to make it through until the waves stop. When the set, relinquishes, and, there's a little bit of pause between the waves. And after, when the set stops, the way I remembered was then came the really interesting part where when you're pushing out, like then you're going to the third section, which is, I call it the lottery, because the third section is like all these random sandbars where you kind of know where they are, but you kind of don't. And when you're at that point, you're paddling really fast, and chances are that you're going to have a set approach around the same time that you're in that zone. And you kind of have a decision because like you might either you sprint your guts out and make it over, or you kind of brace for impact. And I just remember it was always at that point that, people either made it or they broke. And like the thing with Ocean Beach is like, it's a saga in itself, but there's so much water moving. And I think my key to victory was acknowledging that the shortest route was not the fastest route. Like it's like a river. You gotta go wherever the water pushes. And I remember in 2017, it was Kai Lenny and Connor Baxter that were pushing each other really hard. And, they were battling each other so hard that they kind of took a bad path. And when I saw that, I just became very clear that, okay, I'm not going to go that way. If I go down the beach, there's a rip current, and that rip current took me straight out. So, and that was the ultra short version of heavy water, but it's one of those races where it's more than a race. It's, you got some survival modes activated.
And any idea about whether or not that's going to be reactivated, or are you up for the next iteration, or have you been there and done that?
Every time we finished the event, I think all the finishers had the feeling that, hey, it's over. So, I mean, part of me thinks it's so legendary that, and it has its place in the history books already, but I hope it returns. I really would love to see heavy water back on the calendar. I don't know if it's planned to come back. I know there's talks about it between Red Bull and the APP World Tour. I've definitely, like, every time someone's asked me about it, I've clearly advocated, yes, we need it back. So I think we have a lot of athletes, and this is super biased from my side, but we have a lot of flat water races in the world. I think we do need we need at least some ocean carnage event, or I don't even know what to call it.
Well, I think that's a pretty fair description, and certainly made for TV. Proper gladiatorial competition, very suitable for a Viking, I think.
Exactly.
We're all about innovation with our collaboration partners, and we'd like to thank Oscar Propulsion for their support for this episode. Tested and proven, their innovative SUP paddle slits dramatically enhance paddling efficiency. This isn't a fad. Research shows a more efficient use of power input from the paddler and a significant reduction in stress on the body. To paddle brands, now's your chance to license this game-changing tech, and to our paddle community, say goodbye to paddle flutter and get ready for smoother and longer rides. Discover more, elevate your paddling experience, and join the revolution at oscarpropulsion.com/sport. Since 1979, Palm Equipment have been the go-to brand for paddle sports enthusiasts across the globe. Founded by paddlers for paddlers, Palm creates innovative, high-quality gear from head to toe and specialising in apparel and PFDs. Known as the first to produce women-specific paddle products, including the new Tika Women's PFD, Palm ensures every adventurer is equipped for safety and style. With a commitment to sustainability and community, Palm's mission is to ensure everyone enjoys a lifetime on the water. Discover their range at specialty shops worldwide and make your paddle sport experience safer and more enjoyable with Palm Equipment. Visit palm.equipment or see the link in the show notes to gear up today. So Casper, obviously you're most known for your racing career across the world, but you have been on a number of adventures which show the huge diversity of conditions and different opportunities for adventure in and around Denmark. Could you just give us an overview of the Viking Crossings project?
Yeah, so the whole Viking crossing saga kind of started back in late 2016. It's back to like the first moment I set feet on a stand-up paddleboard. It was, I was aware at that moment that this is more than just a surfboard. This is a vehicle that you can actually travel distance on. And I started paddling up and down the coast, and that led me into racing, and it's the rest of the story we've been through. But something that I was deeply fascinated by as a kid was the sagas of the Vikings, and the Vikings that set sail and paddled out from Scandinavia, and went to all kinds of places. They went over and said hi to you guys. Sorry about
for
that.
A while. That's all right. I owe my rugby club crest to the Vikings, and probably a fair slice of my ancestry as well. So, no offense taken.
Okay. But I mean, the Vikings had quite an impact on Northern European history, but actually like much wider as well. And like, I was always fascinated by the stories of especially their warriors, but also they had maritime knowledge, or like they at least jumped into some crazy situations, like making it across the North Atlantic, going down to around Europe, down to the Mediterranean, and like through all these rivers into Eastern Europe. So like their maritime achievements kind of had always like been in the back of my head. And I think when stand-up paddling came about, I was intrigued by it. But it was first like in 2016 that I started really paying attention to, okay, there's more than just racing. And, I started just looking at Google Maps and seeing what would be cool to do. And that was when the first Viking crossing to Norway came about, across the ocean of Skagerrak.
And the film's there on Red Bull TV. It's free. You can check that out, and it's a really powerful film. And I won't spoil the ending, but let's just discuss your first attempt. Well, we know you did it in the end, but let's just talk about your first attempt there, because I think it's only a short part right at the very front of the film, but I get the sense that it was something that you just learned a huge amount from, and which really sort of pushed you forward, because managing failure, sometimes failure can be seen as a negative thing, but you definitely saw that as a real positive. Just talk about that first attempt to get across the strait.
Well, yeah, because the key word was failure. I was so fascinated by adventure, and I kind of came into the first crossing, and the ocean of Skagerrak is between Denmark and Norway. It's roughly 130 kilometers in a straight line. It's a notorious stretch of water because the currents are gnarly, they're ever changing, and the weather is, let's just call it unpredictable. And I paddled that first attempt, and like I'd been going for 16 hours, and I could literally see Norway out in the distance, like 12 kilometers away. I could see the lighthouse from Kristiansand looking at me, and I almost felt like I was tired and broken, and the ocean was chaotic, and I could hardly stand on my board. And I felt like I was Frodo and looking at the Tower of Sauron just staring me down. But ultimately what happened was I failed. I reached a point where I felt like I was just an arm's length away, but the conditions had just deteriorated. A storm had brewed, and suddenly I could no longer stand in these choppy seas. I think we all know the feeling at some point, where you just can't. And I got hauled into the safety boat next to me, and it was too dangerous for myself and my team to follow through. So failure is exactly what happened. I did not succeed on that first attempt, and I basically, when I got pulled onto the boat, I was sitting there defeated, because I had jumped into the project as I felt like the king of the ocean. I was a world champion. I had my sponsors saying, yeah, you got this. My family was saying, you got this. And I felt like I had really disappointed a lot of people there. And, I had been cocky as well. I'd told the team, like, yeah, make sure to put the champagne on ice. I'll be there later this evening. We'll celebrate. And no, that was not what happened. So I was sitting there on the boat. And, when you say, Simon, that I learned from failure, that was later. Like in that moment when it happened, it just sucked.
But someone on the boat was ahead of you, weren't they?
Yeah. Yes. So when I was sitting on the boat with like frozen fingers, because this was in the middle of winter as well, the cinematographer, the director of what would then become the documentary film, his name is Peter Alstead, and I've known the guy for a long time. He's a funny guy, but he just comes up to me when I'm sitting there crying, and he just says, "Casper, don't cry, man. This is the best thing ever. Now you get to try again." And I just remember, like, part of me felt like I was ready to punch him, but he ended up just hugging me, and but it made sense what he said, because I think he was actually, as a filmmaker, struggling to actually find out what type of story is he going to tell, if because I had been challenged, but it was only right at the end that it was too much. So anyway, like a couple of months passed after that. I got home and still kind of down, but pretty quickly, actually, some thoughts started racing through my mind, thinking, well, actually, like, maybe the weather conditions were actually not perfect on this day. Like, I was probably not in peak physical shape either, and navigation, yeah, I probably could have done that better as well. So quickly, like, I started realizing I had made some errors in my approach, and at that point, like, I felt that I wanted to learn from my mistake. And I think I had the choice of either, like, taking the whole experience, packing it down into a box, putting a lock on it, and never looking at it again. That was an option. But that would kind of just be like hiding something under the rug. So I don't know. I definitely chose to face the problems. And 1 year later, the following winter, I was at it again, a second time to try to learn from my mistakes, and that time it was a different story. I don't even know really what to say. It was a process I was in that really taught me a lot about the beautiful thing about failure when it's done. Not, I don't want to say failed correctly, but like when you try to extract as much as you can, because failure can be the best learning we all can have. And I think it's regardless if you're a world-class athlete, or you're a business manager, or you're a student at school. You have situations where you're asked to perform, and things just don't go your way. Like, you flunk an exam, or a presentation goes bad. It sucks, and it really sucked in the moment for me when I was on that boat, but something good did come out of it. And yeah.
And it depends on the sort of label you put on the failure there. So you talked about how you are the king of the ocean. So that was obviously tied up with your own self-image. So therefore, when things don't go well enough, then, that squashes your self-image. And that's what a lot of people do with failure. They think, well, I'm obviously not good at maths or, whatever it is. So I'll just put it away in that box and not deal with it. And if I don't touch it, I don't need to think about the fact that I'm not a master of the ocean. But where you take it into a process, that's when you can start managing it. And it sounds like that's what you do. And you do a talk, don't you? You've been to schools and talked to kids about this whole process, because it's really important that kids, understand that failure is just a moment of time. And basically you only really fail if you give up on what it is that you're working towards.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's I didn't see it myself in the moment. Like, actually, the fact that Peter, the filmmaker, was there, helped actually me realize that what is failure. And And, I had the pleasure of going out to schools to talk to kids about the concept because, and I see it myself when I look back through my social media sometimes, and I look at other people's social media. We are constantly bombarded with images of happiness and success, and people standing on a podium lifting a trophy. And not that there's anything wrong with that. It's one must understand that is just part of a bigger picture. Like there's a deeper story. Like even Michael Booth. When I look at Michael Booth, like he's one of the most fantastic athletes I see, and successful in every single way. And it's fantastic to see, and it's inspiring. But like I think all of us athletes, we have whether it's performance inside the realm of competition or somewhere else, like there's a backside to the medal. And that's what I think the Skagerrak film shows, for me at least, was that for that project to succeed, I had to really dive down and scrape the bottom. And it's fairly natural to do so. I think it's kind of like there's all these sayings and all these cliches, but like, it is the journey that comes to my mind. The journey of going through, it taught, the fact that I failed taught me so many valuable lessons. And I feel like an old fart sitting here, like, oh, this is how it is. But I'm happy that I failed.
Talking about Michael Booth. So in my interview with him, there was one line that he said, which really stood out for me, which is, he likes being a beginner at things. He likes working out the algorithm. I mean, when I was speaking to him, it was before his new arrival, but he was building a house. I mean, talk about, selecting challenges, but he just looks for those new opportunities because it's learning and it's figuring it out and it's getting through to the end of it. It's a problem solving exercise. So in terms of the Viking crossing, it didn't just stop at that point with Skagerrak, because last year in 2021, you got on your foil and your paddle and you did another crossing from Denmark to Sweden. Prevailing wind, I presume, was sort of more or less in your favour there. It was 123 miles, something like that, the Skagerrak. Oh, no, hang on. Kattegat, there we go. So Denmark to Sweden on a foil, 123 kilometres, spectacular, look beautiful. You coming through all the wind farms and so on, unbelievable. 7 kilometres from the finish line. What happened there?
7 kilometers before the finish line was when the real struggle started. Until then, it had been more or less like a walk through a candy shop. Just most magical feeling of just flying across this ocean on a foil, like feeling that I was cheating some laws of physics. But those last 7 kilometers were just before touching down in Sweden, and some factors that were outside of my control entered the arena. The wind died. The wind just very quickly shut down, and to be able to power a hydrofoil in the format that I was using it, and I was using it by having it under my stand-up paddle board and paddling onto a wave and then riding the swell in the ocean. With no wind, there's no swell, and suddenly I was left 7K from the beach and with no other means of propulsion than my arms. I was just sitting there kind of thinking, damn, like, why is it always like right before the finish that something happens? I was like, I remember sitting there and I had a following boat next to me, so I could have just gotten on the boat. But there was an element inside me that kind of like a little devil almost that felt, yes, now you really get to work for your food, your sleep, your everything. So without thinking much more about it, I just laid down on my stomach and started, paddling with my arms, arm after arm, the last 7 kilometers. And I think I was on my stomach for like 3 hours, just, with a little bit of spray in my face. And it was, adventure. Adventure is also challenge. And that, like, I loved, like, of course, I dreamed of like riding my foil inside the bay in Sweden where I was going to land, like just slowly landing like a plane touching down, lifting my arms, shooting the champagne, boom. But that's how we visualize and how we dream of it. And the same like my Norway crossing, I didn't visualize it was going to end in a failure at first. You know, it's those challenges that just pop up along the way. They make it interesting. And anyway, just to tie a knot on the Sweden expedition, it was rough those last kilometers, but it, like when I washed ashore, it felt good. It felt like, you know, I had been out on a adventure and seen stuff that really pushed me to a limit. And that's kind of all I can say. But like kind of like you said, Michael Booth mentioning that, you know, it's picking up new challenges and new ways to learn. That was, I very much recognize that. I have that same feeling of like when I decided to foil to Sweden, it was because it was something new. It was something I had to learn a new skill set to achieve. And it felt really good. It felt really good when it succeeded.
I bet. And doing that, I know Magnus, your coach, sort of went out to provide a bit of encouragement as well.
Oh, yeah.
A bit of social support there. I don't know how you managed to do that 7 kilometers, because you must have burnt more calories doing that bit than the front end of it. I presume Red Bull was involved somewhere in there.
There is a fairly large amount of Red Bulls involved.
Yeah, I would imagine.
These projects, but what goes to the story of Kattegat when I was about to reach Sweden on the foil was that when I was on my stomach, like I was in a, you know, and it's funny how memory works, right? Because like I'm happy that you mentioned Magnus, because I kind of forgot it, because like all those tough moments, they don't always, like, it's not what you remember. Like our mind has a selective memory in terms of, you know, a survival mechanism. Like you sometimes remember the hard stuff, sometimes you don't. But I remember being on my stomach, my arms are falling off and like totally out of energy. And then I see this, like mentally I'm about to just crack. But I remember seeing this small dot out in the horizon coming towards me from Sweden. And that was my coach, Magnus. And I think he had been tracking me, and, you know, he knows me better than anyone almost. And once he heard I was on my stomach, he knew that he had to do what he could do to help. And so he just came out and, you know, gave me some moral support. And I just remember I hadn't seen him at that point because of COVID. I hadn't seen him for 2 years. And I remember we just hugged out in the middle of Kattegat, and it was emotional. Like tears just formed in my eyes. And, you know, when you can be so happy seeing someone that you haven't seen for a long time, sharing a strong passion, that was a magic moment. It definitely was.
And he's been with you, you know, like you spoke about Robbie Nash earlier on. Your relationship with Magnus has been one that you've had for quite some time, all the way through your racing career. And I get the impression that he provided a bit of shape early, but you've kind of developed that relationship where everything's a bit more fluid in terms of your training approach. Would that be fair? Or is he a hard taskmaster? And if you're not down doing pull-ups at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, then you're in trouble?
He's well, it's yes and no. Like I started working with Magnus in 2012. And you know, he was the one that probably brought, like, Magnus is Swedish, and he comes from a background in cross country skiing and coaching in various other sports, but he's a paddler himself. But I think he kind of came in and brought me knowledge of, you know, methodical training. And he introduced me to methodical training of, you know, he made these fantastic training plans, you know, like, you know, these great Excel spreadsheets with all these colors and, you know, hours and like this and that, and morning session, evening session, strength, you know, full package. And he came in, but what I always, and I think that's why we still work very well together today, is because Magnus, like, I was curious to learn from him, but he was just as much curious to learn from me, because this was new territory for him. You know, stand-up paddling I mean, he was intrigued by the body mechanics of how, what muscle groups and techniques and equipment actually go into building a fast paddler. So in a sense, I was the guinea pig and he was, the scientist trying to make sense of everything. I think what Magnus realized was, I did not, I could function with, I am very methodical, but I'm also methodical inside a certain realm. And, I always play when I go on the ocean. And I think just playing on a race board in the waves, I really loved that. And for all my teenage years, that was what I was doing every day when I could. So I think Magnus realized that. And he realized that just as important as it is to have a good, lactate threshold and, to be mobile and have muscle mass, he also realized the value of, the balance skill set and the ability to read water. So he gave me space to incorporate that into my training. So that's what in some, some people will view it as a very loose form of training. But I think if I had gone all hardcore and just stuck to flat water, I probably would be a much stronger paddler, but I don't think I would have been a better paddler. Put it like that.
You'd have been more one-dimensional, wouldn't you, in that environment? And I think that's where stand-up paddling is very different to other endurance sports, because if there's a downwind on, a prospect, or if you got some waves out there, then you're going to want to go out and just develop your skill set, because living in Northern Europe, those things don't come along all the time. Really, you've got to take your opportunities where you can. Whereas if you're on a bike, or if you're a runner, or Nordic skiing, that there's less variability, I guess, in terms of the training experience there. I mean, a headwind is a pain in the backside for a cyclist, but it doesn't have the same effects as it does on a stand-up paddleboarder.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's interesting, because we're still seeing it develop, and it fit my mindset very well to make the most of the given conditions, but also the fact that, if you had Magnus on here, he could talk from now until tomorrow about the positive aspects of stand-up paddling, and I just think that like you said, it's not one-dimensional. It is multidimensional in the sense that you can have conditions where it is completely flat. You can have conditions where you need to change your equipment, you need to change your style. There's so many nuances to stand-up paddle racing where you can totally blow it by approaching it as Rocky Balboa, or there's a time and place for everything. And I think it's just basically what Magnus finds interesting is we are over 10 years into stand-up paddling now, and we still have not defined the optimum physical build for racing. Look at it. A guy you put Connor Baxter and Michael Booth next to each other. Michael is so strong and so compact. Connor is tall and kind of
rangy.
And it's just interesting that there's a functionality.
And there's so little science out there. There was an Australian researcher who, I think back in 2015, did a whole load of different studies around stand-up paddleboarding and all the forms. And he's kind of stepped away from that as a topic. But there's definitely lots of studies to be carried out in the area of stand-up paddleboard science. I could pursue that one, like you, down various alleyways. Just to complete on the Viking crossing, though, it's a 3-stage plan, isn't it, Casper? We've got the 2 crossings. There was an aspiration, or there is an aspiration, to do the North Sea, which is, a bit further. How's that going? Are you going to darken our shores again?
I don't know if I'll call it darken your shores, but I'll...
I was taking on the Viking motif there, but no, I mean, we'd be very happy to have you. But what are the plans in terms of the North Sea crossing?
Yeah, so it's no secret anymore. It's a 3-part, or I don't know if it stops at 3, but definitely the next step in the plan is the oceans of Skagerrak, Kattegat are complete, and then the next basin of water that the Vikings traversed is the North Sea. And right now I'm just kind of openly thinking of I'm analyzing right now.
Mm.
How the hell do I take this on? Because it's a long distance. It's like 800 kilometers of open water, and it's not just open water. It's like, how do I say? It's like stable. It's like consistently inconsistent.
Mm.
Like in terms of wind and waves, and like, I don't know. The short answer, Simon, is I don't know when, I don't know how, but I have a dream of trying to crack that code of crossing this legendary ocean. I don't know if it's going to be on a conventional stand-up paddleboard. Will it be a modified one, kind of like what Chris Burdish has been using?
Mm-hmm.
Assisted, unassisted. I'm not sure yet, but like it's intriguing to just let the thoughts roll.
And you'd be probably better off going UK to Denmark, I guess, as well. Would that spoil the fun for you doing it now?
Nah, I mean, I always love coming home, but I mean, either way, I think would work for me. It's the body of water, like trying to understand how to cope with those conditions the best. Right now, I'm speaking with some top meteorologists from Vestas, the Danish windmill company, and I have access to their data that we're trying to basically crunch the numbers right now and statistically look at what route and what direction is most advantageous. Where it's a little bit more like back to the whole concept of chaos. It's like the wind will shift many times while I'm out there. The currents will change, tides will shift. So it's kind of like Mount Everest for me is probably the way I would look at it. It's that mountain, maybe the final mountain I hope to climb. But if it's this year or next year or in 3 years, I don't know.
But it's being worked on in the background there. It's part of the planning to complete it.
Yeah, it is. And I think maybe like in one sense, I feel I've already taken the first step towards it, where this year when I did the Great Danish Paddle around Denmark, that was also kind of a test of myself to see how does my body work when it's not just one day I'm paddling, but when it's multiple days consecutively in harsh conditions. How do I cope mentally and physically? That was an interesting part of the project, but yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of like shitting my pants right here just talking about this whole North Sea business.
Well, I mean, it's bits and pieces. And coming back to our initial conversation about fear of the unknown, it's about, spending time on the water, and the Chris Burdish conversation I had with him, he again sort of, connected with so many of the things we've already discussed, but he spent so much time on the water in advance of his cross-Atlantic crossing. He had managed so many different situations that had sort of pushed his level of comfort threshold right the way up. So, if it's not right now, then it's not right now, but it's just building up to that. But I'm glad that's still on the agenda. So we'll definitely put your trip from England to Newfoundland on the back burner for the moment after your North Sea trip. Okay, let's move on to the Great Danish Paddle. And one of the surprising things that we found out when we were doing this podcast during the COVID lockdowns is that I was asking people, what's your dream location when lockdowns finish? But what people were actually doing is they were concentrating on local paddling, and really, rather than going sort of broad with lots of different locations and, all of the volcanoes and palm trees and so on, it was all about what's happening in your local area and really understanding it. And people were getting a lot of satisfaction and mental health benefits from really going deep locally. So I know that was the original spark, or one of the original sparks for your Great Danish Paddle, to check out some of your local gems. I know that, the Danish Caribbean being one of yours. Just tell us about your thinking processes about the Great Danish Paddle as a concept.
Well, as the concept kind of, it was during COVID definitely that I also started, realizing, well, what do I have? Where can I go? And, that the whole Denmark circumnavigation had never been done on a stand-up paddleboard. So obviously I was personally motivated with the challenge aspect of it. Can it be done? But I think that the thoughts that were going through my mind was very much, yeah, there's these places around Denmark that I have never visited, I have never seen. There's places that I'm curious about because I've heard about them, but I think for me, it was trying to be able to connect with parts of my backyard. And when I say connect, it's not just look on a map and say, I know where this is. And I've read on Wikipedia what this island is known for. Like I was curious to go like immerse my senses of, feeling, smelling, tasting, and connecting memories in that way. So as going into the project, I had all these dreams and, aspirations as to what the project would be. But I also knew from experience with the Viking crossings that, generally dreams and expectations, they don't always really pan out as you expected. That was also a beauty of this project. Things did not go as expected.
So the Great Danish Paddle, it was a simple project to start with. It was you, paddleboard, a tent, a few supplies. Just talk about some of your experiences there, because it's kind of a bit of a definition of being comfortable with discomfort. I know in one of your posts you were talking about being windburned, sunburned, and having your fingers frozen at the same time. And at the very least, I guess it reminds you of the value of a dry place to sleep and a warm shower. Just talk about some of those experiences as you went around.
Well, as I got going, all kinds of situations arose, like, first of all, the Great Danish Paddle, I got to say thanks to you guys over in Great Britain for letting me kind of borrow the name.
That was Jordan Wiley there. I'm sure he will be very pleased to hear that you've been following him. But yeah,
him and Brendan, they were both huge inspirations. But basically, as I got going, unforeseen things kind of came up, and the crazy thing was that, like, within the first week of paddling, I started out in sunny weather on the 2nd of April, and April at these latitudes can mean halfway to summer or halfway to winter.
Yeah.
And I literally had sunshine, gale force winds, snowstorms, and rainstorms all within the first 5 days of the project. So, I was sunburnt and had numb fingers at the same time, which was bizarre. But it was, I think it was a rough start to the whole project. But as I got going, I had divided all of Denmark, into sections, and the whole distance being approximately 1,400 kilometers. I really tried to just divide it into sections and make mile mile posts of to keep myself enthusiastic and motivated. But it just became so real, from the snowstorm on day 5 to crossing the top of Denmark where the two oceans meet, paddling through Copenhagen with an entourage of 40, 50 paddlers, and going down to southern Denmark to the cliffs of Moon, and the Caribbean crevasse with islands. Like, I was island hopping, almost forgetting that I was on a mission. And just there were so many things in between that just turned it into as probably as Hans Christian Andersen, the famous Danish writer, would call it, just a proper adventure, fairy tale.
And Brendan Prince and Jordan on their journeys talked a lot about the people that they came across on the way, and the support that they get and the interest. Some of the areas that you went to were quite desolate, but as you said, you must have had a bit of that going around.
Well, definitely meeting the Danes was part of my motivation as well, to meet the people and also give myself the time to meet the people. Where, generally when I go somewhere for a project or an event, it's very, you have very limited amount of time to interact with people. And I think I was hoping to have time to properly listen to stories and, embrace the spontaneous. And I was shocked because I set out with a tent and camping gear, expecting to, pretty much just camp. But it was funny, randomly I met someone on the beach or in the harbor saying like, oh, we have an extra couch, or we have an apartment you can borrow. And that's kind of what I'm missing right now. Like I'm sitting here at home, just, in my own place, but there's something special about those people that, I had no like formal connection to, but like they got inspired by the adventure, and, suddenly, a conversation on the beach leads to a warm meal, sometimes a hot shower, and a place to sleep. It was, I think, in short, it was special to be reminded of people's, people are willing to help. People are willing to go out of their way, when there is not a good reason, but when, how is it I'm saying, like we all, like you and I, we all live busy lives, like, but when someone comes knocking on our door, and has like a wild story, and
and a need, it's a community, and again, our sort of primitive drive for security, for society and connection, and all of that sort of stuff. And actually, though people think that it's the giver giving, sometimes they get something from helping someone else who's in need. And I think that's really important thing, for us to consider in the current times that we live in, where everything's so sort of polarized.
Exactly.
We're all human beings, we're all on the planet at the same time. Hopefully that I haven't got too hippified in there, but you kind of get the sense of where I'm going to. And
no, I got that sense of connection. Like
exactly.
That's a human need as well. And I think especially after COVID, we all kind of got into our own little bubbles, and I think now we're seeing like everyone's just kind of exploding to go connect with people. And that was probably my explosion right there, like getting to see and connect and meet.
Amazing. So I got other questions on here. One about the world's largest Toblerone bar, which you picked up at the border post. I had a lot of questions about that, but we'll just skip over those ones for the moment. And then you did you stuck your board on a trolley and carried it a fair old distance. But in terms of that last day coming in to your starting point, just tell us about that experience, because it was it sun shining on the righteous? Did you downwind most of that day? Or was that
on the final day?
Yeah, or the day. It was a couple of days before. You looked like a hollowed out man there. You had a huge beard. You were clearly expended quite a few calories, but you had the odd downwinder on the way back, didn't you? Just tell us about that, and sort of coming into the finishing stage.
So like coming into the finishing stage was, the West Coast, the West Coast of Jutland. And how would I best describe it? It was like the summit stretch of a mountaineer going for the top of the mountain. And I knew that potentially this stretch of coast could have been the most, not dangerous, but the most, problematic, at least, because you're exposed to all the west wind and waves. I knew that there was a good chance I was going to have a lot of problems here. So actually, like, even though there's those pictures of me looking completely hollow and just, like a ghost, at that point, I had made a point of saving energy. And like I had always told myself that until I reach the West Coast, I need to operate at 80%. Like, don't give everything you got, save something. So you always have 20 or 15% left in the tank, because you don't know when you're going to need it. It could be an unforeseen circumstance. Could also just be a really shitty weather forecast. But when I made it to the West Coast, the bizarre thing was that I had the most perfect weather forecast in front of me. Just like 3 days of downwind, which is like bizarre, because that statistically is so rare to get right on that point. And I remember just almost feeling the pressure there that, okay, well, to cover like, it was like still 250 kilometers or something, 300 kilometers in a few days is a lot. So, I got to work, and, I don't even know how to really describe it. It was magical. Like there was times where on the West Coast, I just felt like, damn, like the conditions are so good and I feel so alive. And I got this feeling of like I was actually not happy. Like I was actually bummed because that means it's going to be over soon. Like every stroke I was taking was bringing me closer to my finish line. And, when it's like watching a TV show that you just are so immersed in, and like you love the characters, you love the tempo and everything. But soon enough, it's episode 10 and the season's over. So it was bittersweet making it to the end. It was sweet because, I got to come home to my family. I got to come home to my fiance. And it was bitter because, I was so in love with this adventure of, being immersed, and dealing with simple things. Like, now I'm sitting at home in front of my laptop and there's all the existential things about paying bills and, fixing things. And, it's, when I was paddling, at least everything was so concrete. It was, waking
Simple.
up, making sure I ate. Was I warm enough? Paddle. Like, just life was simple. And, I guess I really felt comfortable there.
Yeah, makes life a bit more simple if you're focusing on those things. So, Casper, coming out of it, obviously you had a huge Viking style beard, which I was rather surprised you didn't keep for the Midsummer Vikings. Actually, all it needed was a horned helmet and really completed the picture. But in terms of your physical conditioning coming out of it, what were the physical changes? I mean, I guess if you were doing this as a training exercise, you certainly would have built your aerobic threshold through, constant days of grinding out those miles. But do you lose any weight and muscle, or do you notice anything?
Well, the takeaway physically was very kind of mixed, because I had a beard. That's right, and I think part of me was sad to let the beard go, but I was getting to a point where I don't know if I feel Viking enough to actually carry it, and it was scratching a lot. I was having a hard time eating, but it'll come back. I'll let it grow again. But I think physically the biggest puzzle was because everyone kept pointing out that I was expecting to burn around 5,000-6,000 calories a day at least. And I was so focused on eating, and everyone kept pointing out, like, you look slim. How much weight have you lost? That was the most common question. And you know what? The weird thing is, I actually did not lose any weight on the trip. I actually put on like 1.5 kilos. And anyway, 1.5 kilos could have just been fluid. Like I could have been dehydrated when I weighed in and properly hydrated when I came back. But I think I was so focused on eating. Plus I had a very protein rich diet. And given the fact that I had 30 kilos of weight on my board, I think I built on, and this is strange. Like Magnus and I were still trying to make sense of it because I put on a little bit of muscle mass. Like I didn't come home super buff, but I didn't lose as much as expected. So it was strange. Like, I definitely think it showed me that I pushed some limits. Then I pushed it further than I've gone before. But I also learned that I did not hit my limit. Like I could have probably kept going. And that was actually an interesting revelation because everyone just assumed that when I came back, I was going to be smashed and, not functional of anything. So it was, I had a sore body. My shoulders were a little bit, how'd I say, they were pushed. And I had a little bit of issue with one of my knees. I think I needed, there was something with some ligament that was under pressure, but I was expecting it was going to be a whole lot worse. So I'm sorry. It's not the whole, I hit my limit story, but
No, we're more than happy to hear that, Casper, and looking out for the next challenge. It's quite amazing. So So just in terms of what's been going on for you recently, we've just had the Midsummer Vikings, and I was down at one of the GB SUP races on Saturday and spotted the logo on a couple of people there and spoke to them. And it sounds like this year it's been, as much of a success as has been in other years. I know that there was some proper Viking weather to contend with as part of that as well. Just talk us through the event, because like the 11 cities, it's a bit of a different format in terms of stand-up paddleboarding, but again, it sort of harnesses some of that sort of collegiate, collective team atmosphere, and it is a proper workout as well. I think I worked out that on the basis of the miles that the competitors had completed, that was enough to go at least 6 times around Denmark. So, and that was obviously some of the time on the water lost. This is how much of a geek I am. So just talk us through the Midsummer Vikings and this last weekend or a couple of weekends ago.
Well, I mean, the Midsummer Vikings, this is the 3rd edition of the event, as it happened this year. We had 400 participants from 21 different countries on 82 different teams. And if you rewind for a second, the Midsummer Vikings came about actually after the second attempt of crossing Skagerrak and the Viking crossing. It was an idea I came up with together with a few other of my friends, paddlers at home in Denmark. And, we felt that the world of stand-up paddling needed, different styles of events. And especially at that point in 2019, there was, stand-up paddling was already starting to boom. And we wanted to create a team event. Because there's plenty of events out there where, it's the individual that fights. But if there's one thing I learned from my trip over to Norway on the Viking crossing, it was that I was only capable of doing that because I had a good team around me. And that was kind of what I wanted to try to bring with the event, was to, help people help each other, support one another with pushing boundaries. And, that was the concept, and it still is the same concept today. Teams of up to 5 people. One person is constantly paddling around the course, which is in Copenhagen. It's roughly 5.5 kilometers long. And it's, a location that's excellent because there's a little bit of calm, flat water. There's a little bit of exposed, slightly choppy waters. And this is the 3rd edition of the event, and we're still committed to it being I'm just happy to see it an event that brings out happy faces, and seeing people that otherwise wouldn't show up to a stand-up paddle race suddenly part of an event that is a festival essentially. And yeah, I'm still kind of on a, how do I say it? I'm feeling the blues right now, both after the Danish paddle, but also the Midsummer Vikings. And it's just, I had a dream of creating an event that was, provided something different and, could be a team thing. And I feel like we're on a good track.
Definitely. And what you've just mentioned is, the post-expedition blues, I guess people call it. You've got all of these mountains to climb and then you've achieved them and then you're over. I mean, you had the Midsummer Vikings, I guess, which potentially lessen the Great Danish Paddle blues, but you've got obviously a huge landmark event and obviously your culinary responsibilities for your wedding coming up. So you don't want to mess that one up. But what else have you got coming up over the next few months, and what can we look forward to seeing you doing?
Well, so I have my wedding coming up in the middle of August, which is the next, thing I'm really looking forward to. My fiance Stine and I, we're having a party inviting friends from around the world, and that's kind of, it's just something I'm excited for because it's a celebration of life. And to be honest, what can we look forward to from here? I'm probably going to be racing again late in the year. We'll have to see what my body and mind is up for, because I'm pretty spent right now. But once I get some time here during the summer to get properly down to the earth again, and recharge the batteries, I have a feeling that it's, how do I best describe it? Like, I can feel tired and like not motivated to do anything, but as soon as my batteries start recharging, it's like these small wheels start spinning and like ideas start popping up. So we'll see. Probably not a big expedition the rest of the year, but I'll be planning something for next year, and I hope to do a lot of events like in the later part of this year, where maybe it's not so much racing in focus, but focus on going to some fun events and like you said, maybe paddle through some cool locations and actually enjoying the scenery and meeting people and talking stories. I guess on that note, we're finishing a documentary film about the Great Danish Paddle that I hope to release and tour around with, but that'll probably first be next year. So
Amazing. And you shared as well, you recorded all of your experiences as you went round. Is that going to be a book, or are you just still processing that?
Yeah, I'm sitting with a book right in front of me here. It's just a simple notebook, but there's a lot of just my firsthand accounts when I wrote my diary during the Great Danish Paddle, and I don't know what it's going to turn into, but I have a feeling I want to try writing a book. I want to try sharing some of these, small and big events along the ride of my life, but especially during the Danish Paddle. I got to meet a lot of people that had a very strong impact on me, and made me kind of start thinking about life and how do I want to spend my life, but also like what values mean something to me. And I think I'm in a place right now where a lot of wheels are spinning in my head, but that's usually an interesting phase to be in.
And opportunities and so on come out of that. And there's been a huge amount of physical and mental outlay that you've put in, both in your racing career and your exploration. So it's kind of just going with it. And as you said, that the path will open out in front of you. I've got no doubt whatsoever. Casper, thanks for being so generous with your time. It's been a really fun and a fascinating chat, and I look forward to catching up with you in person if you are in London in August. I don't think anyone who can't Google something wouldn't be able to find out more about you, but if they happen to have lost that ability, how could they connect with you online?
Follow me on Instagram, Facebook. That's pretty much the two outlets I'm using. But hope to see a lot of people at events this year, and check out the Skagerrak documentary film if you haven't seen it yet. It's on Red Bull TV for free. So just stay tuned. Like I'm pretty sure something is going to happen, but first of all, let's enjoy summer.
Absolutely. Casper, thanks so much again. All of those links will be there in the show notes. Congratulations on such a stellar career so far. Go well this season, and I know I can comfortably speak for the entire SUP tribe internationally when I wish you all the best for a fabulous wedding and a celebration this summer. Take care, and see you on the water, Simon. Hopefully at some time.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, everyone.
After 10 amazing years, the original stand-up paddleboarding clothing brand, Hutch Supwear, which I founded in 2014, is finally closing its doors for good. If you came to the National Water Sports Festival in Hayling Island back in the day, you'll know Hutch and its outstanding quality. In fact, my hoodie from our very first batch, after a decade of constant wear, still looks almost as good as new. This is your last chance to get your hands on some iconic gear with an incredible 50% off everything. From hoodies to tees, it's all going fast, and when it's gone for good. So don't miss out on owning a piece of supwear history. Head over to hutchsupwear.co.uk, use code HUTCH50, and you can grab your favourite pieces while stocks last.